Professor Stephan has been a professor at various universities in various countries in Europe and held honorary professorships in Asia and Australia since 2004. He's a postgraduate from the University of Cambridge and was honorary research fellow at the University of Manchester for many years. The last 18 years, he was head of the Institute for Management and Economics of Education and head of research and development and vice president of the University of Teacher Education, Zug. Currently, he holds the Chair of Excellence for Leadership, Quality Management, and Innovation, University Linz in Austria. Moreover, he is a national expert for the Swiss Innovation Agency of the Swiss Confederation, board members for the Governmental Agency for German International Schools, and board members of the education program of the Foundation of German Economy. He is the editor-in-chief of social science rank journal, Educational Assessment, Evaluation, and Accountability of Springer. And at the moment, he's editing 2 international handbooks. He has raised extensive funds for education research and education projects, was chair and PI for national, international, and multidisciplinary research projects, altogether 15 million for around 70 projects. He's a member of the National Education Research Association in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and the US. Evaluation Association in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. He served in different functions at AERA, ERA, and ICSEI. He organized 13 international conferences on site, for example, the German Education Research Association, and 7 international online conferences. In 2007, he initiated and since then has organized the World Education Leadership Symposium and Network, a biannual conference with 1,000 experts around 100 countries and a network community of 50,000 people. Professor Stephan has observed WIRA since the founding phase and followed all activities ever since. He has participated in WIRA focal meetings and organized symposia for many years. Professor Stephan is strongly committed to support WIRA, and in 2017, he initiated an international research network of WIRA with growing numbers of participants, that is the World School Leadership Study Network. So without further ado, let me hand the time over to Professor Steve. Over to you, Professor Stephan.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for the invitation. I'm also very thankful for your time to listen to my reflection, and I'm very, very interested after my presentation to interact with you, that you share your reflections and your experiences coming from around the world at this conference. And there are quite some challenging topics actually which might have been discussed a bit, but maybe not enough. And maybe it's in the second part of this keynote time, in this last half hour after the presentation, that you raise these topics, because it's about responsibility. My topic is about responsibility. Responsible is someone about something to someone. And I would like your reflection on this topic. When I structured my keynote, I came up with this kind of structure, this kind of components I would like to talk about: that education matters, just a brief account of the many work why education is important, the challenges we are facing, and we discussed quite some on this conference at the keynote sessions, but also in parallel sessions. I would like to talk about education research. Does it matter, and how does it matter, and what could be, strategically speaking, for us to do that it matters more for us, me as an individual, us as a group doing a research project or a cluster, or we as associations, as a professional entity, as a group, as professionals, in raising also voices about correct interpretation and challenges in education. I would like to talk about the responsibility of science, education science, responsible science as a construct where we respond to an agenda maybe given by a research funding agency like the EU. I would like to talk about fast surveys as one example of responsive research. I would like to talk about a topic which bothers me since mid-90s when I studied at Cambridge with David Hopkins, Mel West, Mel Ainscough, David Hargraves. It's schools in difficult circumstances, in challenging circumstances, and I know we not only have individuals and organizations or groups, but we also have networks or even countries struggling because of lack of resources and other conditions not as they should be. So I would like to talk about that and provide an idea about a strategic perspective, which I call ISO strategy. And maybe I can touch very little bit in this next couple of minutes also some global and geopolitical aspects, which we discussed yesterday, quite frankly, at the network meeting of the World Scholarship Study. And there were some participants, maybe they're also among us here, they said it was the first time that we discussed them like that. You know, it's like an elephant in the room that we don't discuss that. But maybe I keep it also as an elephant. No, maybe you not. So maybe you bring that up and I just mention it. So there should be time for question and discussion at the end. So when we talk about education and that education matters, I think this is a very important argument if you ask for resources. If we ask for resources about research or practitioners ask about resources to policymakers and so on, it's not the know-how, but the know-why. Why do we do that? And I think there's quite a strong argument that education matters. There is a history. Go back to the Greek philosophers. We have Comenius. We have many people describing very well and still very accurate, even for nowadays, what education is about, could be about, should be about, how it could look like, and that it matters for oneself, for an individual, but also for society building. So there's quite some actually very important perspective for even the geopolitical situation we have now, or for the global perspective. It's also about responsibility, not only for oneself, but for others. So there's quite a strong argument, but we were quite shocked in the 60s when we had empirical evidence that education does not matter. We had the Coleman report, and it stated that schools do not matter. Schools as a formal part of education, an institution with many, many hours people attend. And they argued that it does not matter, that it does not compensate socioeconomic differences. So that family background is still the major contribution to whether you have success in school and later on in the transition to the workplace, and even about you as a human being, whether you are happy and healthy and so on. So there was a shock with this report. Later on, only a few years later, with Rudder and Yangs and colleagues, they found out, of course, schools do matter if certain conditions are there, if there's a certain professionality in learning processes, in instruction processes, in organizational processes, and I would even argue in system processes. So there could be a contribution, there can be a contribution, and then it's for us, it was research bringing that up, to find out more and more over these decades what really matters, what has impact. And we experienced over these years that we also had some narrow approaches talking about the impact, where we did not have a more holistic perspective, a system perspective, or a multi-level perspective, analytically speaking. So we would argue education can matter, and for us, I think even here at BIRA and VIRA and at ERA, at ECR, which was 2 weeks ago, and I see our president also in the room and other presidents of these associations. We have a line of argument, even if you have a narrow approach, thinking only of cognitive developments, cognitive abilities. Even if you think on large-scale assessment with a narrow approach, we see that it is so much relevant how motivational aspects, emotional aspects, and even social aspects come together. So we have quite an argument that we need a more holistic perspective to that. In Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, and other German-speaking parts, in Belgium, and so on and so on, we have a word in German which is called Bildung. And this is a very interesting concept to understand a more holistic approach where you think it is personality development as a process and as a result, which then again is a process, so the interdependency of me and others. And I think that would be very enriching to include that also as responsible researchers in our research. So besides didactical aspects, besides instructional aspects, we have a discussion about future skills, and some people came up in this and argued for the 4 Cs. I'm sure this is very well known, and there are other colleagues like Michael Fullen says, okay, if you have like the 4 Cs, you can even be a very good, I'm not sure whether he really said that, I just heard about that you can be a very good terrorist if you have cooperation skills and communication skills and creativity skills and stuff like that. So there needs to be something else. And we have a long history when we talk about our moral perspective, about values, about these aspects. So some have extended this with Michael Fullen, for instance, with character or citizenship, to expand even here with these meta strategies from a narrow perspective to get a wider perspective. And I would, being a research director for 15 years for the youth study in Switzerland, and we collected data from 100,000 19-year-olds, I would even say coping strategies really matter. And maybe you find much more word with Cs to continue the alliteration. But we also have self-regulation, that's not a C, yeah, self-regulatory competences, but maybe it doesn't really matter that it is an alliteration. Maybe you have to think what is this about, and some people talk about belonging, that this is a very important concept beyond yourself as part of a community, whether it's a classroom, or a school, a year group, or whatever, even up to state building, community building, and some of the states have a really strong focus, and some forgot this kind of focus. So my professor, where I did my PhD, he talked about a biotope, like a place where there's biological life, and he used this kind of phrase for education, an educatope. So maybe I use it in English as an educar habitat. So maybe we need to think of places where people belong to, where students, like pupils, belong to, which again pays in. We did a study for the OECD 2006, me together with David Hopkins, and we looked at the schools which really did well, where they had in large-scale assessments really bad results, and they really improved. And it was about schools that created a culture where everyone felt, I belong to, I was recognized, and so on. So this is also like a part of our professionality, to think about these spaces, these communities. Well, the point is we are facing probably all the time, it's not a new topic, quite some challenges. We have challenges with environment, with the climate. I think this cannot be neglected anymore. We have the SDGs. So education is a very important part in the SDGs, also implicit in all the other SDGs, not only that one which really focuses explicitly on education. But we have other topics like democracy. We just voted in Germany in 2 states, and we see the very right coming up with very simplistic arguments, and we have that in many other countries, and we have some of you are from the US, you are voting, and others are voting, and we see there is something about democracy which is very important if you think to build a community, a state. So democracy is in danger in some parts, maybe, yeah. If you think geopolitical, then yes, and with media we get into bubbles, we see what's going on around the world, so there's a challenge for education, that people are enlightened, that they get a wider perspective. Yeah, I even talked to a colleague yesterday night, and she says, I'm not reading newspapers anymore, I'm just having my social media. And there we are, that we get into bubbles. And I think that's also like a challenge, like how we are informed, and we as academics, we are maybe really those who are much more critical with information, but I think that's a very important topic. But there are many more challenges. When we had yesterday our meeting, the network meeting, we came up with quite some challenges across the globe. In our youth study, it is in Switzerland that we see that we have quite some stability with 19-year-olds, but we also see that there are some groups which we would call, we can put them in a risk group because of suicidal thoughts and other aspects, that these numbers have doubled. And that's quite a fact, that if these numbers were 5 and now 10, and another indicator is maybe 10 and it's 20%, and if you think about if you think about the combination of factors, and this risk group is just bigger in Switzerland, where we are quite well resourced, I would argue. So maybe it is not only about resources. So we have to think about that if we have scissors effects. Yeah, some do really well and it's wonderful, but others not. And if the divide gets bigger, we also have challenges around digitality. We have countries here represented. They would dream about the situation in Switzerland where every pupil has access to technical devices. Yeah. So it's not only an issue within a school or within a region or within a country, it's also around Europe, around the globe, that we are differently resourced in terms of access of technology. But coming with that, maybe school is not important anymore because you find so many cool things in the internet which you can use for teaching, and now with AI we can probably stop having teachers. Or maybe teachers only become those. That's the argument. It's not my argument, just to be clear. It's the argument that, yeah, they are responsible for the relations, but all the instructions, the personalized learning, the flow come through adaptive applications which allow a pupil really to find not being bored. I always thought we have to do a study about being bored in school. Yeah. So, but we also talk about inclusion. Just this afternoon with Julia, with Mel Ainscough and others, we have a session, and some are also here, about inclusion. And is personalized learning using digitality moving us away from inclusion, where pupils, we actually want to not only integrate, but do things together? So I would say this is a chance, of course, but it's also a challenge. But it is about us to turn even challenges into chances and think about how we do it. For those, in our studies, we have a longitudinal study with around 500 schools already over, 7-8 years. And I feel that their teachers, they say, when is this craziness over and we can teach as we did like 8 years ago or 10 years ago? And others say, hey, the school is just bankrupt. We have to invent a new school. The school as we organize in classes with time and so on is over. So maybe we have the challenge to reinvent school, maybe completely innovate. We have a new study with about 10 schools, which just said we don't have teachers anymore, we have no classrooms anymore. And they really create learning processes in a very, very different way. Maybe we can learn from that, and then of course they use technology, but the interesting thing is they integrate that in a very smart way. It's not, and you have to do this and that and inclusion and digitality, but they say this is all around, let's integrate it in a very smart way. Another challenge which I hope that holds only true to some countries, but the more and more I'm informed around the globe, it's maybe with some exceptions, we heard also yesterday at the network meeting, is staff shortage. So in North Rhine-Westphalia, if this number is correct, we lack 10,000 teachers in a state with 5,400 schools. Yeah, that's quite a lot. And it's not getting better. And what we also experience, that we have other people being attracted, and some argue about a deprofessionalization in education, where we just argued education is so important, we should actually put in much more resources. And if it's not people, then think about really smart ways. And I think that's a task where also us as researchers come in. We see less resources, more and more demands. Even we contribute to with impact research, with new concepts, with developments, with intervention studies, with quasi-experimental designs, we contribute to the knowledge base and can practice keep up. Practice has, in many places, so many challenges that maybe that's not possible. But what is our role? Should we think about little resources? Maybe that's even a research question, to be even much more strategic, what you do and what not do. Maybe the new discussion is what they should leave out in schools or in other education institutions. So I will come back later to this question of strategic behavior, but I would think that maybe as associations, it is a very important argument. We should create a lobby for education, because I would argue that we have too little resources in education. And resources may be also concepts, and to put them into practice. But I really hope that we can discuss that. Do we have too little resources? What can we do as academics in that field? And I argue education research matters, because that could be a part of our role, to do research in difficult circumstances or in difficult times, to differentiate much more like how really certain things in a complex, uncertain way work. So it goes a bit slow. It is what I would call the responsibility of science, that we do not only high quality research, rigorous, transparent, following all our criteria of quality with all aspects, whether it's validity, reliability, and so on, economy, qualitatively speaking, quantitatively speaking, mixed method speaking, in all different types of research. But it's about how our findings are used and how we can generate better knowledge, because we all, at least me and maybe you and some others, we do pieces of research, and also like Popper argued, we bring them together as a puzzle, and this gets a bigger picture. So like, what is our responsibility with doing that? Do we do the right research and the right aspects? Do we research all these new challenges? Or maybe even they are old, but come out a bit differently with the context, and even across different contexts. I would even argue that we have to do much more thinking about the context, that context matters, and that we think about contingency, the coupling of aspects, even interventions. But it's also the responsibility of science and in science to think about how we disseminate our findings. There's an argument in practice, I don't know whether you are confronted with that. There's so much research, but we cannot understand that. We cannot use that. Whether it's policy level, it's district level, it's school leaders, or whether it's teachers or other educators in school, social workers and so on. So how do we not only do knowledge acquisition, but knowledge management and dissemination and translation to the context, the different contexts people are in. So I think there's quite some aspects, moral aspects, dissemination aspects, ethical aspects in this kind of topic. Of course, we are in education and not in physics or in other sciences, where obviously me being expert of InnoSwiss, you get confronted and you always have to think, can this new technology also be abused in war or whatever? Yeah, someone is developing something and then you have to think like, how can that also be abused? Maybe it's not intentional by the developers, by the academics working together with other organizations or even industry. But we had that too, didn't we? Also with large-scale assessment, with PISA and others, or like with the studies about digitality, and then some countries, some politics says digitality is bad, and then they move away. I heard that about Denmark and about other countries. Like, is research even quoted and used appropriately? So these are issues I would like to raise and hear from you what you think about that. I think it's very important for us also as associations to reflect on that. And even have statements about that, and liaison and network with all decision makers that they use it appropriately. If I think about me, how I started research, it was about an interest. I had some opportunity, data access. I think it is sometimes quite difficult to do like really wonderful, sense-making, change the world, rescue the world research, because you do good research and then you're quite focused in your track. Maybe it depends on the institution whether they employ you, or it depends on other resources, maybe even project funding. And there we have another topic. Do we have enough resources for our work? I would argue we lack resources in education research. I talked to David yesterday from BIRA, and he said that there are studies, so again, what you would call a narrative evident, but David could show that about England, that funding for research went down over the years. If this holds true, we have to check in our countries. Are resources getting down? Of course, it gets more competitive, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, do we have enough research funding and how it is allocated? Is it like program research that they say we want to have answers to these kind of questions? Or do you still have this liberty of research that you can say, no, I think we and some colleagues, we do collaborative research in a very important topic and you find resources for that. So this is then only about the quality of your research proposal. So in terms of resource allocation within research. So my argument, there's an O missing, I just see now. It's not too little, so then it's too little resources for education research. And I would like to know, how is your experience? What do you think about that? So too little resources for education, too little resources. And maybe our role is, our responsibility is to argue for that, to raise voices where we have, and also our associations to have possibilities where we can argue about that. We did as responsible science, and I framed it like that, a study, COVID hit in, it was the 16th of March when schools got closed in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. And on the 13th of March, I thought, now we really need to understand what happens when school goes down. And within the first 2 weeks of school closure, we had a survey out, and we collected data with 25,000 people, school leaders, district leaders, 8,000 pupils, and so on. And we asked them, like, what are you doing? We did time analysis. We asked them, which resources you have? Like, are you in touch with, and so on, many questions. Also some open questions. I had very strong critique. You cannot ask so many open questions in a survey. And we really struggled because we really analyzed, coded all the qualitative data too. But only on the 21st of April, so only like 3 weeks later, we had the first book out on COVID impact. So I would call that really fast research. And of course it's problematic faster because you do it very quickly. You cannot have conferences about the survey and then, go on. The crisis hit in right there and we needed to know. And everyone was very happy to find out that we have pupils, they just don't get up. They are kind of, they are into the digital world doing gaming. And so on. And others did very well. Even 1/3 said it's much better than schooling because I learn much more, because it's much faster how I learn. So again, we realized there are scissors effect when schools closed down. And then we found out lots of things. We found out the role of self-regulation for such period of times. And we also, because we did it in longitudinal, we saw always when we had schools closed, quality in school aspects went down. So we saw really these waves compared to Switzerland, because they were gladly open for this idea not to close schools. So we managed through media and TV and newspapers and so on that schools stayed open for all who wanted to go. And that was very, very important. So I'm just arguing that sometimes fast surveys, which have some methodological problems, maybe, but are better than not having any contribution from academics in a debate where suddenly medical science people take over a discussion. Okay, that's just a short example. So I'm very good in time, actually. I'm much faster than I actually thought. But I want to read something, because you can ask Anne and I, how can you use AI in research? And what you read, what I want to read, what I can read to you, sounds like we don't need researchers anymore. Maybe only to start. Because it says, first, for problem definition and research design, you can use AI. Use AI to analyze existing data and identify research gaps, or desiderates, as we say. Generate potential research question hypotheses depending on the research paradigm. Who is telling the AI about research paradigms and stuff like that? Anyway, optimize experimental parameters and just control variables. Literature review, quickly identify relevant academic papers and studies using AI-powered tools. Summarize key findings. Highlight connection between different researcher. You can even work transdisciplinary, maybe even interdisciplinary using AI in research. You know, even international, depending on, and that's my point, depending on the knowledge base of the AI. What is the AI accessing? What is in the internet? Is everything what is our knowledge base in the internet? I would say no. I would even say for our journals, it's not everything open access. Then we have language. Maybe, yeah, AI can translate very quickly all these different things, which maybe not being accessible for us as human beings, because I cannot read Arabic language or other pieces of research which are very, very interesting to read, because we read English written language. But anyway, so we have also some bias, haven't we? So the AI has biases too. Data collection, automate surveys, questionnaires, employ web scraping for online data collection, utilize natural language processing for text-based, streamline participant recruitment, big data analysis, and it goes on and goes on. I have like a few slides what AI can do. And of course, if you go through the whole process of data analysis, writing up interpretation, dissemination, different forms, short, long, AI can be very supportive for us, at least. I think I had in my research group, one in Germany, one in Austria, and one in Switzerland. We had a discussion some years ago. We even wanted to program. We have, I don't know, 1,000 interviews, each 1 hour. Can we not just automatize it and then have a text and then have coding, even inductive coding? Like, it could go so quickly and it takes so much time for us working qualitatively with that. But it's not possible. Of course it's not possible, because you have data protection, you have technical limitation, and so on. There are quite some issues using AI at the moment. So one is the bias mutation, one is the transparency, one is the human aspects, ethical aspects, and so on. And I would like to discuss with you, if you're more interested in that, to discuss our responsibility in using new technologies in a very smart way, but ethically correct. And this. So one of my last aspects I'm really thinking about is, and of course you have very different research interests. I come from the area of leadership and school development and inclusion and equity and equality and governance and so on, is what happens when schools struggle. Sometimes this goes very, very quickly. What responsibility do we have as researchers? Is it only the technical problem? Is it a problem in the subject group, in the year group? Is it a problem with the whole organization, with leadership? And there's quite some research about school effectiveness, even about schools that fail, failing schools. We even had states that named schools which were not doing good as failing schools or as identified or whatever, even here in England. And of course this makes a circle of decline, because if the prestige goes down, who wants to go there? The rich make the choice. We know from many studies, so parents well informed don't send the children to these schools. And we see in a longitudinal study in Germany that this can really have quite some impact for a school, that a principal, an anecdote, one case study says, Stephan Huber, you have to look, that's the only blonde we have in a school in Germany. Half is Arabic and half is Turkish. And it's not multicultural anymore. So we have schools with a high percentage of, let's call, socioeconomic disadvantaged pupils. And it does something also with stuff. So when I started this study in 2013, I did my first 100 interviews in schools, in 10 of the schools. And the most sentence I heard, and now I'm talking about Germany, this I can say, was, we want other children, and then we can do the teaching again. And of course, we don't get other pupils. But we heard it, I think 2 days ago, on Monday it was, someone says, what are the policies? Can we do the busing? You know, that we move children around to have a more diverse population of pupils. When we started this project, also quantitatively, also looking on student achievement data, etc., we realized there's a high correlation with socioeconomic status of pupils and school quality. But not to such a high extent, because there are schools with very high qualities who do fantastic work. And these are the schools, when I started my speech, that do make a difference, that really try to compensate for socioeconomic differences. And we as a group, we want to learn more about how to do that. And leadership is very important in these schools, and collaboration is very important, and finding structures and developing professionality among everyone, and working very closely with not only within teachers, but also with the educationalists, the social worker, the educational psychologists, and also expand even to other networks. We did a study in Switzerland involving 23 communities of practice, and we tried to establish networked system even beyond school sector, moving out to other education institutions and associations of sport, music, and other activities, cultural activities. And we realized this really makes a difference, and interestingly, not only for those who are disadvantaged, but for every child. So we find out there is a possibility, and we had one project in Germany that's called School Turnaround. You could even find it. Otherwise, this word is a bit tricky for the German context, because it does not employ like aspects like in the US or England, when you say, okay, this is a failing school, we fire the principal, the new principal comes and we fire half of the staff. That does not work in Germany because of the teacher associations and so on. But there are ways to change an organization with a very profound, persistent, professional approach. And of course, that's why I'm telling you, it integrates responsibility of everyone. It is about the concerted action of different actors coming together and develop what I would call a strategy, a theory of change, that they think, know why do we want to change? And then they find out how in this specific context, because schools also differ a lot and they need different kind of interventions to make that work. So in Germany, so for those who are interested in Germany, I think we have now the biggest education project, as I think in whole Europe. It's about 20 billion euros over a period of 10 years for 10% of our schools in Germany. And I think that is probably quite some impact for educational research, that we argued that these kind of schools need additional resources. So I'm not sure whether the 20 billion does the trick or what they do with the 20 billion. Maybe we waste a lot of the resources. But here is a responsibility of research, that we say we have researched in this field nationally, but also internationally. Let's use this knowledge base for practitioners, with practitioners, and not only to do further research about practitioners. So, nearly coming to the end, I suggest that maybe, not only for us as researchers, but also for schools, it is time to think about a strategy, because probably it is not about only innovation. It is not only about optimization, that you do things you do better, more effective or more efficient, but it's also about to sustain certain things which were developed very well. And I call it ESO strategy. So when I work with schools, not as a researcher, but someone who wants to work closely with practice, we always do this kind of exercise. What are you doing in school as a principal, or as a year group, a subject group, or as a whole organization as a whole, or to an aspect of inclusion or digitality or whatever? You can use it with different foci and with different groups. And then we say, what do you want to sustain? What do you want to keep? So it's a very resource-oriented approach, not like an evaluation where you say, where are the weaknesses? Yeah, at this point, but you talk more like about a historical perspective, what has developed and should be sustained. And you also think about what are you doing, but you could do better. But at the moment, I have to say, in practice in the project where we work with school leaders and teachers, it's very much also about efficiency. What can we do with less efforts? Because we lack teachers, we lack time, we have so many challenges. So it is about efficiency. And then, of course, it's about innovation. What are we not doing? What comes from research which has to be innovated with me, with us as a group, with us as an organization? But very quickly I realized this differs from person to person, group to group, institution to institution, because some institutions really want to do a jump. Others only want a little step. So it really depends on how they allocate the resources and distribute that on innovation. Innovation is very cost intensive. And of course, if you do efficiency work in optimization, you reduce and gain time or resources. So, and then I realized we have forgotten something, and that's maybe a discussion we also should have, that we can also abolish or suspend certain things. So a new activity would always be with principals and with teachers. What are you doing? And you should stop doing that for a period of time or forever. Sometimes it is only for a period of time, and then you realize you have never really used this time well, and then it's gone forever, or at least for a longer period of time. So this is what I call ESO strategy. And maybe we can also, I never actually thought I could also imply that for my work, but I'm now using that also for my work. And even when I do a 360 with my staff, I ask them, like, what should I innovate? What should I abolish? Where can I do something better? And so on. So I think it's also interesting to employ that even maybe for Vera or Bera. Or ICSI or ECR or whatever. So this is not from me. It's a nice thing to say, to do the right things and them rightly. And maybe that's also a responsibility for us as researchers, not only to do good research, but in the right way and ask the right questions, which really contribute to responsible science. That's what I'm trying to argue. And I argued that context matters. So we hear findings from England or from Wales or from Scotland. Do they apply also for Swiss culture or Austrian culture or culture in India? How does that work? And you know, even Vera is so international. Vera anyway. But how do we do this knowledge translation? We are very aware of that. And I think it's really interesting also as responsible academics to think, what do we do in collaboration where countries have less resources for education? So what we're actually trying to do with the Vera network, the International Research Network, Ingrid is in charge for that, but you as our president, we try to raise money for countries who have no money to raise, to conduct this international study. And I think that's also a very important perspective when we talk about responsibility, because we have also global differences and they also need to be researched. But when countries want to be involved, which we should not be in a project, like Russia wants to be part, or we have situation also with Israel and so on. Like we had that yesterday, and I would really like to discuss that with you, like how we as researchers deal with that. So my association would say, I can work with Russians or with only if they declare that they are against their political heads. But if I look at my colleagues in Russia, they are young ladies, very ambitious, very good, the heart on the right place, but they cannot do something because their career would be ended. Like, how do we deal with that? I have no idea. I have a dialogue in myself. So I think that's also something when we think about responsibility, we want to not have as an elephant, but we want to discuss that and see and find out when we share different perspectives, what comes out from that. So it is, to close my speech, about professional responsibility of all, policymakers, politicians, district leaders, school leaders, us as researchers, to think about the demands and the resources, the realities, the possibilities. So that's how I picture that. And there always implies decisions. and to be aware of all the decisions we are taking on the way, not only about do we ask this item or use this scale, but also from a bigger picture. Okay, so thank you very much. I really hope we do some jumps, and if we don't do a jump in education research, maybe it's also very important to do little steps, because that's what research does, little steps, and we put them together, and after some time we do quite some way, we would say. So thank you very much for listening to me about responsibility, some ideas, and I'm really happy to discuss and hope you share your reflections. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Stephan, for a very insightful presentation. In fact, he posed with us a lot of questions. I'm very sure you would like to share your thoughts, your perspective, at the same time, perhaps ask him and pose him with more questions. All right, so I'll invite perhaps Professor to the center stage, and I'll be here. So can I pass the time over to the audience where you can pose your questions or share your perspective? Anybody?
Until you think whether you want to rise, and I hope you raise your hand and say something, I want to thank Gregor, who sits there, and also Julia sitting next to him, and others of my team, but also people who are in the audience like Liesel or Ingrid sitting here, for being a part of this way of reflection.
There's a lady over there with a question, please, just in the center.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, Professor. You mentioned concepts such as creativity, innovation, ethical correctness. My question is, if we keep in mind the pace of change and the development that we know about as researchers, creativity matters in similar ways and very much, I don't want to say more, but it's expanding its importance the more we make contact with creativity, with education, in close connection with education matters. So we can, in the same way that we say education matters, we can also extend that thought to creativity matters and innovation matters. Thinking about ethically correct use of resources, I have the question within my own research field, how do we measure creativity? How do we measure innovation as researchers? And what is ethically correctness when we look at new developments in terms of the use of AI in education? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Of course, it's not an easy question, but on the other hand, it's an easy question. Because how do we measure innovation? You could argue very easily about the impact. So if the innovation does something good, yeah, if it contributes to something, but this of course is a question of definition, like what do you want to, you do an innovation for a purpose. So that's why I said know why instead of know how. The innovation is maybe the know how to another, the why. And if you are very clear, conceptual, very clear, what you intend with the innovation, and then you could measure it. If you describe the aims, not only the methods, but the aims in a smart way, in a clear way, in a precise way, and so on, measurable way, then you can measure the impact. Maybe not at large, but in a pilot and so on, and then you scale up and you learn from that. I think that's the easy part. When we measure innovation, the innovation potential, we are also looking on who is doing the innovation. If we want to grant money for innovation, whether it sounds plausible, like whether it's sensible what is suggested, know why and know how, whether they have the potential to do that. There's quite some innovation where it's obviously not being done by one person, where with our complexity, with our different knowledge bases, where you need to be networked, have different partners. So for instance, for the Innovation Agency in Switzerland, it's very important that you have and bring, it's even by law described, that you bring different partners with different expertise together. So it cannot be, with the granting scheme I'm talking now, done only by oneself, but of course we had interventions by one, by accident, planned, and so on. But I think, which is very important ethically speaking, that with every innovation you have intentions, but you also have maybe side effects, and even unintended side effects. And we would call it a risk analysis and so on, to also be clear about that. And the more you describe that you really thought it through and thought about all these kind of things, and then it comes to, can it be abused, as I just described before. So we have creativity. What does it mean actually that you do something what was not done before? That innovation is something which was not done before. Actually, we have a big differentiation about innovation, how we use it in education, because my schools say we have an innovation, and it's definitely not an innovation. It's only new to them, but not to us. So some people say, oh, this is an innovation. And I think, my goodness, this we do for 20 years. Yeah. So some school leaders now have coaching, and it's an innovation in professionality of school leaders. Yeah, but it is around for many years and in different areas, and we know quite a lot about that. So it's not really an innovation that school leaders are now getting some coaching. So I say this is like some ideas to what you just mentioned, but I'm thinking what is very critical to think of unintended side effects, and also not only about the innovation development, but the innovation implementation. Innovation implementation needs quite a lot of conditions that something is successful. So you can have something very successful in school A, and then think, okay, let's this idea fly. You have a network of schools, and then they just implement that, and suddenly it does not work, because they have different context, different other aspects. So, and this is what I meant with contingency, to think about like a configuration of aspects which have to come together, or being very clear about certain conditions. But of course, if you think about innovations like driving Tesla, or using a Swiss knife the first time, you don't need an instruction. It is very easy. It's without risk. It is you see the purpose, the benefit very clearly. And I think these are criteria which are very easy for innovation. If innovation does not do harm, does not cost anything, it's only benefits, and you can do that without reading an instruction, and you just do it, then innovation is of course very, very design based. But we have innovation very often in education where you need training programs and extensive training programs. You may even have a certificate, because only if you have this certificate and pay in, then you can use this kind of tool. So again, we bring in not sharing, we bring in boundaries. But that's maybe another association I just have. Actually, when I think of that, and we think about failing schools, and we would never call them like that, but schools that really struggle, not only in terms of pupil catchment area, but of really being in a difficult situation, teachers don't want to work there, it's like really difficult. If you come up with the innovation of a big training and development program and school consultancy and coaching for the principal, and you come up with this concerted action I just described, they don't want that. They might not even want a part of the 20 billion, because they say it's only an additional burden for me as a professional working in this work environment. So I think we really need to think creatively about innovation, that it comes without these extra costs, yeah, and about a very clarity, also conceptual clarity, and conceptual awareness about all the different side aspects which come to that. It's yeah. There was another question, right?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Pauline Meijer from the Netherlands. I have a very different point. I was really struck by, and really thank you for pointing us at the responsibilities that we have also as scientists. And I take that very seriously, and sometimes I lie awake at night because, you know, something has happened with the opportunities for girls to go to school in Afghanistan. And you were talking about scientists in Russia, and you know, the theme of the conference, or at least of the starting keynote, was the future of education in a changing world. But sometimes these changes are so bad, you know, and it's not about innovations. It's about, you know, going back to the to terrible times, etc. So I try sometimes not to think about that too much. But on the other hand, I hear you talking about that, so I think you might have, you know, an idea to work with this feeling of powerlessness that you sometimes have, as when you hear about these stories about, you know, the girls in Afghanistan, for example. And so, how do you deal with this feeling of powerlessness? And what can you do? What can we do as scientists, and what can we do as an organization also?
Mm-hmm. You know, when I picked that topic, I thought, my goodness, it's actually not really appropriate for me to talk about it, because I'm neither a philosopher or an historian or something like that. I just talked actually more about my reflection as a researcher who does, with a group or 3 groups maybe, research with some partners in some areas. But when we think about responsibility, and if you start to read a little bit more, and what I drafted so far, also in my extended PowerPoint, this is 200 slides, and I didn't want to show it because I thought you're shocked when I rushed through my slides. Then it's very, very clear that we are not only talking about the responsibility of one person or a group, but as a profession. So using this idea about the professional responsibility of a profession means that there are situations which also you cannot change in terms of locus of control alone, but you need others, and it's maybe only a contribution to dealing with that. It might be not a solution for the problem, it might be a solution of us being active, responsible in dealing with that. So what I would say is, very simplistic said, we don't have to be and deal and struggle with that alone. If we experience around the world, maybe even in a school, in our own country, conflicts, crises, or catastrophes, it is not about a professional alone, but about a professionality community to deal with that. And it starts always with a very open talk. That's why I said, like, for instance, yesterday when we sat together, we have these geopolitical situations, and we don't talk about it. Well, let's start talking about it. Why not? And I can express my insecurity. You know, I said we live in a VUCA society, uncertainty and ambiguity and so on. I might not have my opinion at the moment, but as an academic, I'm reflecting, and I can do that much easier with others. So, but this always needs an open discussion without immediately, what do you call it, Urteile, judgments, like a bit an open moment where we can reflect on that, which helps to shape an argument or a decision or a judgment or something like that. That's what I would say. I know, psychologically speaking, we talk about Seligman and this experience of being helpless. If you experience like a low self-efficacy, as Badura would say, again and again and again, you come into this what Seligman calls learned helplessness, I think, in English. And as a researcher, doing international comparative research, you are confronted. You have suddenly a meeting with people from Arabic countries and Israel, because you work with them for many years, and then you can just pretend nothing happens, or you can, and people are, even people from Sweden, they are like suddenly, okay, we are all academics and we know each other, and I even know that this person, for instance, from Israel is even demonstrating against parliament or government once a week. But we have to speak out. We have to talk about it as colleagues and friends in this context. Because our profession, particularly when we are working internationally, like Vera as an association, we have to talk about that, I think. It sounds very simplistic maybe, but I'm not the education counselor for Vera, but yeah, I would say let's talk about the elephant then and see what we can do. And suddenly a conversation in this context with this study opened up, and it really was a liberation that we just talked about it and then found our way to deal with the halo effects behind. Yeah.
Thank you, Stephan. I was so struck throughout your talk with the use of, I would like to know what you think, and let's discuss it, and let's engage in conversation. Your openness in what you demonstrated, what you and your team have accomplished through relational dimensions, discussion, collegiality, networks, and collaboration. And it even made me think of wipe everything, all the C lists off, and what would be, if we imagined education, what would happen if we had that as a hashtag? Let's talk about it, what you just said. And I was wondering if you have theory and strategies and anecdotes that shows how that belief in practice works, so that, for example, the anecdote you shared about how quickly you and your team were able to have a book that said, during this crisis, this is what's happening, and at least we have something with which we can work. So this consultative, beautiful schema, if you can tell us more of what to read, where to go for that, how to do it, how to leverage that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for Liesl for this question, but I could actually ask you the question. I can also ask you this question. I can only give like two very short accounts. And Ingrid also would like to ask a question or say or give a statement or answer maybe Liesl's question. In a way, the responsiveness is part of this kind of construct. As professional researchers, if we do very profound professional research, most of us, and maybe I was also advised that very, very often be very focused. You know your discipline, you have your, if you work in this kind of concept, you do a study about the concentration achievement in the variation of visual illustrations, acoustic, and so on. And then you do very focused research, like pure research, very focused. And I think that's completely, absolutely okay to do this kind of research. I think as a profession, we need a variation of different kinds of research. Some work transdisciplinary or even interdisciplinary. Education is quite interdisciplinary to be doing psychology, sociology, history, and so on and so on. Actually, empirical research in education is quite interdisciplinary anyway. Maybe also empirically, you do only quantitative research, but if we only have quantitative researchers, because that's only what is funded, we lack quite some aspects dealing with whatever the truth is. So we need also qualitative or mixed method. So actually I'm arguing in responsibility of a profession for variation, and that there are always enough people to be responsive to what's going on. I would never argue that we all need to do fast surveys. My goodness, that was not my argument. If you misunderstood me, I think that was really cool that we were responsive and that everyone in my team did not say, sorry, Stephan, I'm at home and I don't want to do anything with that, because everyone actually in my team said, yeah, there's a crisis. My goodness, we have to find out what they think, what they mean. And so we were actually, as an attitude, we were open and responding and using our methodology, our literature body, our disciplines, whether it's crisis management, leadership, innovation, and so on, to apply to this phenomenon schools closure. What's going on? So it was actually more using our instruments and saying, okay, let's play together, because I could have never done this kind of study alone. But because there was Nadine and Paula and other people joining in very quickly and more, and actually it was, when we started in the team, there were only me and Nadine, and then it were 3 with Paula, and suddenly we were 4 or 5, and suddenly it was the whole team working like crazy, and then the book was there. The book is not important. It was much more important that we had newspaper articles, I think altogether 500. We had radio interviews in all the countries. We had TV shows, newspaper, and I think it was our responsibility to inform as good as possible to this point in time where people did not know, before they fall back to whatever they would fall back. And it's even now, when we don't have such a crisis or catastrophe, it is about our responsibility to enlighten all decision makers and inform them as well as possible, maybe not for all of our profession, but for some, to inform them. I think that's part of a responsibility of maybe even of an association, to appreciate variation in research and also acknowledge that these kinds of research are also needed.
Ingrid.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephan, for your wonderful talk. My name is Ingrid Gobelin. I'm from Hamburg University in Germany. What strikes me during this whole BERA conference, everywhere I went to, all sessions, is that we have a plethora of knowledge. We have also what you presented to us is knowledge that is there, and we have it, and we can be sure about it. But what we obviously can't do, or what we obviously don't do, is kind of have the courage to say this is knowledge we build on. This is shared knowledge between all of us. I mean, I always have the impression that we have a bunch of knowledge, but we always have the tendency to say it's not enough. It is not differentiated enough. It is not whatever enough. And everybody has to add something to it, which is right, which is okay. But I think, should we not, we as a WERA, as an organization, kind of have more courage to say, this is now something we can build on, and we just trust in this and make the next steps. And if this is the case, then we would also have the responsibility to be transparent about it, to write it down in a way that is not only understandable to those who write, but also to those who read, because there is a slightly it is a slightly different process, reading and writing. So I think if WERA could develop more in this direction of saying, okay, we have not enough knowledge, but there is a core of something we know and where we build on which we can share, and we write this down in a way that is eligible to not only ourselves. That could be a strategy. I loved your expression of we need a theory of change. We need a theory of change, we need a strategy, and we need something to build on. And I think every one of these is there. We just have to have the courage to put it down. Mm-hmm. And I think your lecture was an example of this kind of courage. Mm-hmm. Thank you again for this.
Thank you very much, Ingrid.
Thank you. We've got, you responded, and there are a couple of questions, 3 more questions.
Okay.
Please
go. So Ingrid, there are 3 aspects I want to mention. First is, if the EU sets out and says, responsible research is for Horizon, whatever, these 5 topics, and they make sense, and it's okay to do that. They grant projects, they develop a call on XY, and you can apply. But if we, as a professional organization or an umbrella organization with all these experts, We could do that too. We could even use our methodology to apply. We can have a survey amongst all others. We can use Delphi study to ask all the experts and develop that. It does not need that Liesl and you as ex-president and chair for the National Research Network, so Liesl as president, or Joe sitting there in a relaxed way, being president-elect, decide that. It could be your responsibility to organize this process, to say, hey, as you suggested, let's think about what is needed, or you can even say, second point, we make our knowledge base visible to others, not ourselves, not the focus inside the organization, but outside. We want to engage with policymakers. We want to engage with politicians. We want to engage maybe even in certain countries more. With certain parties more, or with, we could have such an outreach agenda, like where do we want to reach out to make visible what is going on, and even set agenda, because we have globally as researchers so an unequal situation. If you're a researcher in Kenya, where do you get the funding and so on? So of course that's what you're already doing. I'm not saying that that's new, but just responding to Ingrid. Because I'm actually arguing, and I deleted by accident one slide. I told you I have so many slides, I deleted and only kept the structure for you. If you want my whole transparencies, you can write me an email. But I deleted one slide, and one slide of the challenges that we have innate knowledge. We have a knowledge base which is not applied. So maybe this is also part of our research agenda. Why do we know in certain areas so much, but don't see it in practice? I give just an example with John Hattie. You have, I don't know how many he has, 1,200 meta studies on instruction, which is more than 50,000 studies on instruction. And if I observe classroom level, I observe classroom and I don't see all them in place. So it's not a problem of the knowledge base, it's a problem of the translation into practice. And it's also part of our research, why we have knowledge and not using it. And there was a book, I think, by Whitehead in the 1920s, and he called it innate knowledge. It's knowledge we are not using, and we have that all, me too. I have also knowledge I'm not using. No, not me, others. But anyway, we have some knowledge which we're not using, but definitely as professionals in practice, but maybe also as researchers, because there are certain conditions not in place and so on. But that could also be just stimulated of what you said, Ingrid, what could be also possible, not only to say what do we need as research at the moment and set our responsible science agenda, and do that with Delphi study, survey, and so on internationally and within the associations, to have a communicate and to meta-reflect on responsibility. That's more what Liesl says. What kind of attitudes, what kind of values are important? And then also why do we have knowledge bases which are not implemented? These are the three reflections to what actually also in combination what you said.
Thank you so much. We have quite a number of questions, so maybe I'll invite the lady in white to have your questions, followed by the lady in front. So, yeah.
Hello. So I want to hear your opinion. What's your opinion? How you recognize the importance of leadership responsibility for teachers' well-being in a change process? Because in developing countries, we do some change every day, new reforms, innovation, and all over the world, and especially in our countries, the teachers' well-being is so low. It's an urgent need to address. It's not in my country, it's all over the world, but especially in a series of change. Yeah, so what, how do you see, so what is a teacher's leadership responsibility? They should be responsible for the work to enhance the quality of education, or they should be responsible for the workers who do this work? Thank you.
Thank you for this important question. Because I studied with Mel West at Cambridge, and he brought me to Manchester, and he would have not said that, but I'm just, you know, he would have said we don't need happy teachers, we need competent teachers. But that's not my perspective, because I think, again, if you want one thing, it depends on so many other things. If you have unhappy teachers, maybe they are competent but don't use their competencies. I think we have far too often very competent people who are not motivated, or motivated people who are not competent. Both is a problem, yeah? You need both. If you have a competent person, no motivation problem, but if you have someone who's highly motivated and no idea, it's also not good. So I would argue, why don't have a holistic approach on this topic? Like as I said, it's not only cognitive aspects in learning process, it's motivational, emotional, social aspects. If I come to health, I would say that's a part of a profession, like how much strain you experience, how much job satisfaction you experience, how much emotional exhaustion you experience as one dimension of burnout. It does something with someone, with a group, with an organization. So school leaders as superiors have a responsibility for the well-being of their staff. Yeah? If you go into health research, and I'm not like the expert for health research, they would say in health research, the highest or the most responsibility for your health is yourself. So then I would say, okay, school leaders have 3 levels of health responsibilities for themselves to stay healthier, for their staff, which is not only teachers, it's also social workers, it's educators, it's school psychologists in many countries where we have now communities of practice, and it's the children, yeah, or the students. So, of course, that implies that, and I did research on that, around 2000, my PhD was around 15 countries, how they prepare and develop school leaders. And if I now recall, at that time, we did not have much training and development in their programs on health issues. And nowadays, I would, in all the leadership programs I'm in charge of, I would put in health issues implicitly all over and explicitly, because as you see in these many C's, I've added coping, and I added coping on the level of students in dealing with uncertainty, complexity, and strain, and whatever you experience in certain groups higher than in others. So for professionality, coping strategies are very important. I think for me it's coping. So if you put that in place, it might be, and I'm speaking also as a psychologist and an educational psychologist, I would say there are boundaries for school leaders as it comes to the health of an individual teacher. And this is also to be respected. So there are health aspects a leader not necessarily need to solve, but the person itself, and you can imply strategies that a person can use, certain resources, not necessarily the school leader, but other resources in place. So the school leader is not only like the human resource manager who cares about the people, it's caring leadership, Karen C. Lewis, but also someone who employs structures, processes, and provides resources that they themselves, as individuals and as groups, can use if they are in a situation of high level of strain, emotional exhaustion, or, and I would say that even better strategy, preventively, not only as a reaction to something, but to employ structures, processes that preventively increase the probability that someone does not get into a certain combination of risk of health.
Thank you. We have about, I think, time for about 1 or 2 questions, but can I invite this lady in front to raise your questions? And if, let's say, we have time for another, that would be great.
Okay, we make short questions, short answers. We get everyone.
Okay, so over to you.
Thank you. I'll try and make my it's more of a comment, and it's actually to take the conversation back to the previous discussion that was going on. My name is Angela Arnott. I work for Global eSchools Community Initiative based in Nairobi. but I'm also based in Cape Town, and I do a lot of work on the continent in many African countries. And I loved the way you opened the dialogue and the debate and the suggestions about addressing knowledge gaps and trying to have some kind of outreach, ideally through WERA to other research organizations, particularly on the African continent. The comments I want to make is that I'm here at this conference because of my funder, not because I chose to come. And the research paper that I'm presenting, or will present, is not of my, the design was given to me by the funder. And that's the case in many of the research efforts that we have in Africa, because there's not the recognition that we have the skills and the capacity to do high quality research. So if we get research, it's usually through a kind of UN, World Bank, GPE kind of initiative, who then decides whether this person is competent or not. So there isn't that relationship between the universities and the governments that you might find in Europe. And that's a big gap for us, because we can't find the resources to do the kind of education research that needs to be done. So that's the first point I want to make. And if there's any sort of outreach that WERA can promote local research in those countries, that would be of great benefit. The other thing I wanted to say is that the research I find here, I'm not an academic, and so maybe that's why I'm biased, but I don't find it very applicable. There's a lot that I've sat in on research papers here, which I think, oh my goodness, where's the findings? How am I going to apply what I've heard here in a real life situation? I listened to a paper on YouTube, which I think is a wonderful resource and can supplement bad teachers and or underqualified teachers, which is a reality we face. We've got 70 kids in a classroom with a teacher that doesn't have a teacher qualification. How can I apply the research that you've done in the situation that in many of the, I know it's BERA, so it's British Education Research Association. It's too distant from my reality and from what the kind of advice and research support that I'm doing. And so I'm just saying, the geopolitical perspective that's been shared in a lot of the sessions in this conference haven't been applicable to my situation, and or to, I think, many of the colleagues who would be coming from a similar background. Sorry if I'm speaking out of turn, but that's just a perspective.
Okay. So thank you very much for sharing. And I asked to bring up all these kind of things. Now this was not a short question, and I cannot answer shortly. But I don't know how many people have still put up their hand. But what I would like to use from your statement, it is not only about setting a gender. I also tried to speak about it, but I left out many things because of the time, because I wanted this discussion. But one thing is very clear. We have research appraisal. Yeah, we have funding schemes, and I mentioned that very briefly. But of course, if countries have not, at least to a decent degree, research funding which is only given by professional criteria by professionals, then the funding is also like deprofessionalized. So if their funding is not like the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft or other research bodies, is not given through a national body using whatever kind of criteria, but decided by professionals, but by, let's say, this would be only the industry or the government or whatever, then you only get this kind of research, because then we have like program research. And I would argue we need substantial resource and also resource allocation policies which are decided by professionals, because only then we are a profession. We are only a profession if we can decide ourselves. But then, even if you have that, it depends on what is fashionable and what kind of criteria you choose for resource allocation. Yeah, if it's maybe only quantitative high end, or is it like that or what that? It's not only about the topics; it's also about the approaches. So I think for a responsible research, we need, that's what I said, a variety. And that's why we need to allow a variation of different kinds of research to contribute to that. I know it's only addressing a bit of your statement. It was not necessarily actually a question. But I think that is also very important for us if we think on an associational level, that we have a statement, and particularly in those countries where this is not in place. So that means we get political, professional political at that point. And I think we need to do that. Yeah? And then we can have a discussion. And in a democratic approach, we would have discussion and debate, and maybe we don't have the same opinion. But this is part of what is so important to us.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Maybe what we have is just time for one question. We only have 5 minutes, so short question, short response.
Or we make the question maximum 30 seconds and the answer also 30 seconds.
Okay, that lady over there, I think she has waited for
And we
quite
speak
some
all
time.
very fast, okay?
Yeah.
I'll try to ask a very short question. Hua Hui from University of Leeds. I'm an associate professor there. So I sit in cross-faculty research ethics committee. And when we talk about responsible research, we talk a lot about research ethics. So my question, short question, what's your opinion of the relationship between research ethics and responsible research and responsible researchers?
Oh, that's a short question, but a difficult one. I would actually love to ask you, what is your opinion? What is your opinion? For me, it is very clear, if you do responsive research, and you do fast research, let's say, you still have to apply ethical issues. Standards, you still have to be aware of that. We need all our professional competencies. Let's say you do in every paper we would write, this is the weakness of this paper. Yeah, we asked too little, we asked the wrong questions, or we have this research approach. You know, we have to be aware where are our decisions in the research process, and be open about that, and even maybe that explicitly reflected, that we say, and we missed out this and this, or this was not applicable, or this was not feasible. Yeah, but ethical questions need to be always addressed.
Yeah, I guess because we have so many different identities. Well, we have social responsibility, become a responsible researcher. We also have responsibility to develop a knowledge. And sometimes when you develop new knowledge, it might go conflict with some values. And that is where the problem arising.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's really tricky, so
absolutely. And I think this is true for probably all the professionals, or many professionals in whatever kind of branch or area, that we experience dilemmas. That we say, should I do it that way or that way? And that's what I say, where we have to make decisions. We have to make decisions all the way, all the time, so many decisions, also as researchers, but as practitioners, even more important. Yeah, so decision is something we have to be explicitly aware, and maybe, if possible, use the time to think about all these decisions. Yeah, that's also an ethical approach, or a responsible approach, that you are aware where do you make decisions and why you make these decisions.
So thank you so much for those very interesting questions, and I would like all of us to thank once again Professor Stephan for the insightful conversations that we had. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.